Welcome to the Deconstructionist Deep Dive, the podcast that doesn't just accept the story.
We break it
We examine the pieces.
and expose the machinery inside.
Let's dive in.
What if everything about modern leadership advice isn't just wrong, but is designed to be wrong? Okay, so today, we're not really here to talk about, best practices or the latest leadership trends. This deep dive, it's more like an intellectual demolition job.
Right.
We're targeting the main conceptual weaknesses, the vulnerabilities in how we talk about corporate leadership right now. Our mission, really, looking at these sources, is to map how power analysis has evolved.
Yeah, tracing it all the way back.
Exactly. From, say, the ancient cynics just rejecting authority flat out, right up to modern critical theorists who really map out the psychological tricks involved.
And we're deliberately looking past the shiny mission statements, past the friendly manager persona. We're asking, what's the actual structure of control? The one that all this new leadership stuff is, designed to protect. We're zoning in on what the sources are calling the ultimate lie.
And it is a masterful lie, isn't it? Because it's so subtle. It's this idea that the corporate hierarchy itself, this structure built on unequal power, unequal resources, is somehow neutral.
Just a container.
Yeah, just a framework. And you can supposedly reform it just by adding things like empathy or mindfulness or purpose.
And that, according to the analysis we're looking at, is the really dangerous part. It makes it sound like the problem is just behavioral, right, not structural.
Exactly. If the structure's okay, then all you need is, what? Better managers, more training, nicer intentions at the top.
And that completely sidesteps the more radical, maybe uncomfortable truth. A system built on coercion is coercive. You can't just slap an ethical label on exploitation.
We can only make it feel nicer, more palatable.
Right. So the liberation imperative, as the sources frame it, means we have to reject that whole premise. Real freedom isn't about finding a more comfortable way to be subordinate.
Like a softer cage.
Precisely. It requires getting rid of hierarchical control altogether. We're being offered this, slightly nicer, maybe air-conditioned cage and told, look, progress.
And the danger then is actually believing that having slightly better masters means you're somehow liberated. Yeah.
This modern leadership talk, it's just the latest version, isn't it? Armed with all this psychological jargon, emotional intelligence, it's probably the most sophisticated justification for inequality we've ever seen.
The velvet glove, covering the same old iron fist.
That's the image.
So, okay, to really get inside this, we need more than just surface critique. We need some serious intellectual tools.
A whole arsenal.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the sources point to a few key thinkers to help us do this properly, to make sure we're getting at the deep structure we're talking about.
Michel Foucault, right, for how power works subtly, surveillance.
Yep. And Nietzsche for understanding power, morality, that fundamental drive for dominance.
And then the anarchist thinkers, people like Emma Goldman, who questioned all forms of control.
Absolutely. Plus, the cynics, like Diogenes, representing that radical, almost aggressive independence.
Don't forget historical materialism, especially thinking through someone like David Graeber, tracing where inequality actually comes from materially.
Right. These aren't just names we're dropping,
No, these are the tools, the specific lenses we need to dissect the machinery of this corporate ideology, starting with, I think, the most personal level of control.
Okay, let's unpack target number one. And this one feels... yeah, insidious is the right word. The whole idea of empathy as a management tool.
It's everywhere, isn't it?
Totally.
Yeah.
It's presented like this absolute moral necessity. If you're a decent manager, you have to be empathetic. End of story.
And that moral framing is exactly where the deception lies, according to this analysis. The critical point, the vulnerability, is when empathy stops being, a genuine human thing.
It becomes a tool.
Exactly. A deliberate technique for optimizing the workforce. That's the moment it flips into being a covert form of control. So you, the listener, you've got to ask, am I experiencing real connection here, or am I just being managed? Human resource management disguised as humanity.
To really get the mechanics of this, we have to bring in Foucault again, don't we? This idea of biopower in the break room.
Biopower. It's not about the old school, crushing dissent with force. It's much more subtle.
Right. It's about managing life itself, managing populations, their health, their emotions, all to make society, or in this case, the corporation, run more efficiently.
And empathic leadership is basically biopower translated into the corporate world. The system isn't just happy commanding your physical actions anymore.
What's more?
It wants to manage your inner life, your psychology, your emotion. The classic example they give is the manager pulling you aside saying, hey, are you okay? You seemed a bit off in the meeting this morning.
Sounds caring, right? On the surface.
Totally, but functionally. That question is a high-precision data collection tool. It's gathering intel for workforce optimization.
So if you say, yeah, I'm stressed, the workload is insane, what happens next?
They don't usually respond by fixing the workload, do they?
Yeah.
No. They manage your response to the stress.
Ah, so they offer like mindfulness workshop.
Or a subscription to a mental health app. Maybe suggest flexible hours, which just moves the stress around, doesn't really reduce it.
So they're investing in managing your feelings.
So you can cope better with the system that's causing the stress in the first place. It's about keeping your productivity up, keeping the machine humming. It's like incredibly sophisticated maintenance on the human parts of the machine.
Okay, but let me push back a bit here. Play the skeptic. Is the argument really that managing employee stress is always bad? I mean, surely some level of human management is necessary. Where do the sources draw that line?
That's a fair question, and it's crucial. The line, according to this critique, is drawn right where the relationship itself becomes inherently exploitative. Which, in this context, is the moment it's an employer-employee relationship within a hierarchy. The moment money is exchanged for labor under conditions you don't fully control. This brings us to what the anarchist critique, drawing on thinkers like Emma Goldman, calls the ethical impossibility. Meaning that genuine unconditional care is basically impossible in that setup because the relationship is defined by exploitation, by the power imbalance, by the fact that you can be fired.
So the empathy is conditional.
Absolutely. The instant the company's need for profit clashes with your need for well-being, guess which one wins? The empathy evaporates. It was never the primary driver.
Okay, so this corporate empathy, it's strategic. It's that velvet glove again, hiding the iron fist of capitalism.
Pretty much. You're still subordinate, you still lack real power, but now maybe you feel a bit guilty not checking email at 9 p.m. because your boss asked about your kid's soccer game earlier.
Right. It lubricates the machinery of exploitation.
It makes it smoother, softer, less obviously abrasive. But the core power dynamic, that stays exactly the same. The structure holds, even if the tone changes from commanding to, well, therapeutic.
So for someone who wants to just completely reject this whole patronizing dynamic, the sources point towards the cynical response, right? Like Diogenes.
Exactly. Diogenes stood for radical self-sufficiency. Living simply, rejecting social norms, comfort, and crucially, rejecting any kind of patronizing concern from those in power.
So the message there is pretty stark, isn't it? True freedom means you actively push back against anyone trying to manage your internal state, no matter how nicely they frame it.
Accepting their care, their emotional data gathering, is basically granting them jurisdiction over your inner life. Diogenes might say, if they offer you a free wellness seminar, question the motive. If they offer counseling through HR, be deeply suspicious.
Your well-being needs to be self-defined, not managed by the entity signing your paycheck.
That's the radical takeaway. So next time you're in, say, a mandatory empathy training or get that just checking in email, the critical toolkit tells you to pause and decode it. Ask yourself, is this connection or is this quantification? Is this care or is this control?
All right, so we've seen the micro-level control, the empathy weapon. Now let's zoom out to the macro-level justification. Why does this whole system have to keep going? Enter the concept of the infinite game.
Ah, yes. Popularized by some contemporary business thinkers.
Right. And the source material we're looking at, it labels this idea that business isn't about winning, but about perpetually staying in the game as a very clever bafflement strategy.
Bafflement. Interesting term. Why bafflement?
Because it sounds profound, doesn't it? By calling the game infinite, they make the whole system of corporate competition seem, well, eternal. Natural, unquestionable.
Like you can't escape it.
Exactly. It sets up this false choice. You can't win or lose, you just play forever. Or at least play better, more sustainably, forever.
Okay.
It completely masks the reality of ongoing domination.
But that whole narrative starts to fall apart when you apply something like historical materialism, doesn't it? Especially thinking along the lines of, say, David Graeber's work on debt and violence.
Absolutely. The sources make a really strong case here. Capitalism's supposedly infinite game. It runs entirely on finite, often violent acts.
Okay, unpack that. That's a core point.
The game doesn't just magically sustain itself. It needs constant fuel, constant reinforcement through acts of exclusion. We're talking about historical dispossession, land enclosure.
The creation of markets through force.
Right. Monopolizing resources, crushing competitors, using political leverage to open new territories for exploitation. These are all finite, often brutal actions that create the conditions for the game to continue.
So if you look at the origin story of almost any major corporation,
You won't find gentle, infinite collaboration generating that initial seed capital. You'll find coercive extraction and the expansion. It requires constantly shutting down alternatives, constantly excluding those who can't or won't play by their rules.
so the infinite game is really only infinite for the players who manage to grab the spoils from those finite, violent acts early on and can keep financing their seat at the table.
Exactly. The system isn't natural. It's built on historical violence and maintained by ongoing market aggression, cloaked in softer language.
Which forces us to look beyond the talk of purpose and legacy and see the underlying Nietzschean power dynamics.
Right. Nietzsche was all about that fundamental drive, not just to survive, but to expand, to dominate, the will to power.
So when leaders talk about playing the infinite game, what they're really talking about from this perspective is the perpetuation of their own power, their own entity's dominance.
It's not about peaceful coexistence in some endless marketplace.
No, it's the drive to be the dominant player indefinitely. The language of long-term thinking and legacy just provides a more palatable, almost noble-sounding cover for what is, at its core, an aggressive existential drive.
Expand, control, survive, often at the expense of others.
It's the will to power dressed up in sustainable fabrics. It sanitizes the inherent aggression by calling it something less threatening, like just being forward-thinking.
But the sources don't just leave us there, right? They offer a countervision, the alternative view.
Yes, the anarchist alternative,
Hmm.
which fundamentally rejects the whole premise that this game of business is some immutable law of nature.
So instead of asking, how do we make this infinite game slightly less awful?
The question becomes, why are we even forced to play this game? The alternative suggests things like free, cooperative associations, moving completely outside these corporate structures,
Shifting the focus from that hierarchical race for market share.
towards genuinely non-exploitative ways of organizing what we do. It's a fundamental refusal to get caught in the infinite trap in the first place.
Okay, so we've taken apart some core concepts, empathy, the infinite game. Now let's look at the specific architecture, the psychological scaffolding that holds this whole thing up, the justifications for hierarchical power, right? The nuts and bolts of the deception. Tag A. Benevolent authority and sacrifice theater. First up, benevolent authority. This is basically the divine right of kings playbook, just, updated for the C-suite.
The CEO isn't just the boss, they're the visionary, the founder, the inspirational figurehead.
And that reliance on charismatic authority, it's deliberately used to distract from the raw structural power, isn't it?
Absolutely. You're not just obeying the system, you're following a genius. You're contributing to their grand vision. It makes subordination feel voluntary, almost noble, like you're part of something bigger rather than just, well, complying under duress.
But there's a simple freedom counter to this, right? Just recognize...
Yeah, there's no actual natural right to command.
Exactly. Strip away the fancy title, the polished bio, the TED Talk.
Right.
What's left? A person who controls resources, often because they inherited them or acquired them through those finite acts of aggression we talked about.
Once you see that, the moral justification for their authority just kind of dissolves.
Yeah. And to keep that illusion going, leaders often deploy this other mechanism, sacrifice theater.
Ah, the performance of suffering.
Right. That whole narrative. I slept under my desk for a week. I missed my kid's birthday for this deal. They broadcast their suffering.
And it's not usually genuine vulnerability, is it? It's calculated. It's a performance designed to justify their position and their rewards.
And how does that work? The sources link it back to Nietzsche's idea of slave morality, right?
Sort of, yeah. It reinforces the hierarchy. The leader basically says, look how much I suffer. Look at the immense burden I carry for all of you. Therefore, I deserve the power, the perks, the corner office.
And you, the subordinate, with your smaller burdens, should be grateful for my sacrifice.
Precisely. It creates this responsibility asymmetry, the massive inequality, the fact they earn hundreds, maybe thousands of times more and dictate your working life gets reframed.
It's not privilege anymore.
No, it's presented as the necessary compensation for the heavy weight they carry. A noble burden borne for the collective good. #B. The comfortable prison, the ideal environment. Okay, next piece of the architecture. what the sources call deception 3, the comfortable prison.
Right, this is where we deconstruct the ideal work environment. The free snacks, the cool office design, the nap pods.
It looks utopian, doesn't it? Like the end point of enlightened management. But the analysis here frames it as a highly advanced system for total control.
And we have to bring Foucault back in again. The panopticon idea, but redesigned as great workplace culture.
Explain that connection.
Well, the original panopticon prison worked because inmates couldn't tell if they were being watched at any given moment, so they started policing their own behavior. They internalized the surveillance.
Okay.
The innovation here in the ideal workplace is that the guard tower is replaced by culture, peer pressure, internalized norms.
So the control isn't coming from the boss watching you anymore.
Not directly. It's self-enforced and enforced by your peers. You're not being overtly forced to stay late. But if everyone else is grabbing the free craft beer at 6 p.m. and you're walking out at 5 sharp, you're not a team player. You're failing the culture.
So the ping pong table isn't actually a perk.
According to this view, it's a disciplinary tool. It serves two purposes. One, it keeps you there longer, blurring the lines between work and life.
And two,
it facilitates cultural engineering. The workplace becomes this environment designed to subtly modify your behavior, to integrate your identity with the company's identity.
So if being a Googler or whatever becomes part of who you are,
then challenging the company feels like challenging yourself. The cage is comfortable, sure. The walls are just softer, fuzzier, harder to see.
The sources are pretty blunt here. The most effective control is the kind you welcome. You wanted the free kombucha, you wanted the cool social events.
And in signing up for that, you implicitly agreed to this constant low-level behavioral monitoring and adjustment. Hashtag sexy. Generational scapegoating.
Okay, final pillar in this architecture of deception, generational scapegoating. Or what the sources term millennial pathology, though it applies more broadly now.
Right. This is using emotional labels, calling younger generations impatient, entitled, addicted to phones, whatever, to basically blame the victims for systemic problems.
And it's such an old trick, isn't it? The analysis highlights this historical pattern, Socrates complaining about the youth back in ancient Greece. It just keeps repeating.
Every established generation seems to find fault with the newcomers for not fitting neatly into a system that is arguably failing them.
And the function of the scapegoating. It's incredibly effective at individualizing structural issues. It stops any real analysis dead in its tracks.
So if we talk about, say, the housing crisis.
The narrative isn't we need massive economic reforms. It's young people just need to stop buying expensive coffee and be more patient.
Or if they're labeled impatient about career progression.
The solution offered is maybe some training on managing expectations if they're called addicted to technology.
The answer is a digital detox workshop, not questioning why the work itself might be alienating or why society feels so disconnected. The system itself, never questioned.
But the rational response, the counter-argument here, is to completely flip that narrative.
How so?
Frame that impatience not as a character flaw, but as a perfectly logical reaction to systems that offer diminishing returns. Why should a generation wait 30 years for stability if the previous one got it much faster? Impatience in this light becomes a form of critique.
And the addiction to tech.
Maybe frame that not as a moral failing, but as a predictable symptom. A symptom of the isolation created by the breakdown of older community structures, and frankly by the very technologies designed by corporations to capture our attention 24/7.
So the scapegoating prevents us from asking the really uncomfortable questions about the environment itself.
Exactly. It's a crucial defense mechanism for the hierarchy. It ensures the blame always flows downwards, never upwards. Hashtag VIV. Synthesis and strategies for liberation. Okay, so we've laid out the architecture of deception. We've seen the mechanisms. Now, let's try to synthesize this. What are the key tools of this modern soft power? And more importantly, what are the strategies for resistance? For cognitive resistance, as the sources put it. Hashtag the soft power technologies.
Let's quickly recap that toolkit that makes the control feel less controlling. First, we hit psychological management. We talked empathy, but it's broader, right? It's weaponizing emotional intelligence, EI.
EI started as this idea for personal growth, self-awareness, but in the corporate world, it's often taught to managers as a way to read and manipulate the emotional states of their team for better output.
And employees are taught EI too, but
often so they can better manage their own stress and negative feelings in order to keep producing. We've even seen examples in the sources of internal platforms where employees rate their mood daily, literally quantifying and trying to manage the emotional pulse of the workforce.
Wow. Okay, second tool. Discursive control. This is about language, right? Controlling the conversation itself.
Exactly. It's the subtle work of redefining fundamental concepts, like freedom. Corporate ideology constantly hammers home the message that freedom means choosing better masters.
You're free to choose which tech giant you work for. Maybe free to pick your projects.
But the underlying relationship, the wage labor, the hierarchy itself, that's presented as non-negotiable, immutable. They've managed the debate so effectively that imagining a world without bosses seems utopian, childish, impossible.
And the third tool, credit redistribution.
Yeah, this is using symbolic economics, giving out rewards that feel valuable but don't actually change the material power structure.
Like fancy job titles. Vice President of Synergistic Innovation.
Exactly, or access to senior leaders, being put on a high-profile task force, getting a slightly bigger cubicle. These are symbolic credits. They reinforce the hierarchy, they give people status within the system, they encourage competition.
All without costing the company much in terms of actual profit sharing or ownership. It's high-status recognition for low-cost compliance. Hashtag the toolkit for resistance, cognitive resistance.
Right.
Okay, so that's the toolkit of control. But recognizing it is the first step to resisting it. So what's in our toolkit? First, doubt as an epistemological resource.
I love that phrasing. It basically means trust your gut, that little voice inside that says, this mandatory fun team building day feels off. Or this wellness initiative feels manipulative.
Don't dismiss that feeling.
No.
Yeah.
That intuition, that cynicism, it's a valid form of knowledge. It's your built-in resistance to being managed. Treat it as valuable data as an analytical starting point.
Okay, second tool for resistance, historical consciousness.
We touched on this. Knowing that things like benevolent authority and generational scapegoating aren't new, they're recycled tactics.
Then you train yourself to spot the pattern.
Exactly. When some new management fad comes along, ask yourself, which older mechanism of control is this new buzzword just rebranding? History provides the codebook.
And to use that codebook effectively, you need the third tool, philosophical armament.
Right. Using the critical theories we've mentioned, Foucault to spot the surveillance, Nietzsche to see the power plays, Graeber to understand the material history as actual analytical weapons.
They let you cut through the corporate jargon.
And see the underlying structure behind the glossy presentation or the inspiring speech. Hashtag text structural alternatives, moving beyond the system.
But critique isn't the end point, is it? The goal is liberation, moving beyond just analyzing the system to imagining and maybe building alternatives. What do the sources offer here?
Well, they point towards exploring post-hierarchical organization, thinking seriously about models that move beyond that top-down leader-follower structure.
Like what?
Things like worker cooperatives, where ownership and decision-making are shared, decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs, maybe.
Yeah.
Systems based on consensus or liquid democracy, where power isn't fixed at the top, but flows based on expertise or need.
Then there's radical self-sufficiency, taking inspiration from Diogenes again.
Yeah, the ultimate resistance might be just opting out as much as possible, reducing your dependence on the system for your income, your status, your validation.
If you genuinely don't need their approval, their promotions, their symbolic rewards,
their power over you shrinks dramatically. It's about reclaiming control over your own life and needs.
and finally, cooperative economics.
This draws more from the anarchist tradition. The goal is building non-exploitative ways of producing and distributing things.
Shifting towards structures where wealth, risk, ownership are shared horizontally, not concentrated vertically.
It's the practical belief that we can organize our economic lives around meeting human needs and fostering collective well-being, rather than just maximizing profit within a hierarchy.
So the core deception is that this system just needs nicer managers. But the real takeaway, the liberation imperative, is that maybe better masters isn't progress at all.
Maybe it's time to think beyond masters entirely. And that's our deep dive for this week.
Remember, the most dangerous illusion is the one you don't know you're in.
But now you know. So here's our question for you. Where will you see this exact deception playing out in the next 24 hours? In your workplace, maybe? In an ad you see? Perhaps in a conversation with your own manager? Once you start seeing that empathy as control mechanism, well, you can't really unsee it.
Let us know in the comments. Question the narrative. Deconstruct the dogma. See the system.
I'll see you next time. Stay skeptical. Thank you for joining us.